Welcome to Real Life Renos, the podcast. My name is Karen Brown. I'm your host, and we're continuing our series on accessible housing with Ron Wickman, who is an architect specializing in barrier-free design, and he joins us from Edmonton. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks. Welcome to you.
We've done a show on the history of accessible housing, and then we did one on the 3 areas of a home you focus attention on for ease of renovation: entry, vertical movement, and bathrooms. Our listeners can go back and listen to those podcasts. But in this podcast, we're focusing on the first point, entry, and looking at specific renovation solutions to make a home accessible. We've already acknowledged that the ideal situation would be that the front door would be 2 feet or less off the ground. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, so that for me and my history working in this field of accessibility, I really did think it was an easy thing, 30 years ago, and I've since discovered that here in Canada it is a little trickier than one might think, having this no-step entrance. There's a technical issue in terms of trying to keep water away from the wood. So we build our floors higher than the ground surface so that we don't expose the wood to water. I'll talk about how we can get around that. And then secondly, and in some ways the harder one to get people to buy into is more of a kind of attitudinal or cultural history to this. So people just think that a house needs to have steps at the front door to make it, to give it character, make it feel like a house. And I know that many people who use wheelchairs that have built their own houses have purposely built their homes with steps at the front door, and they have their on-grade access at the back so that they feel like they are in keeping with the rest of their neighbors in the streetscape. So that's very telling of some of the challenges that we face, both culturally and technically. One story, I guess, that I can share with you is an experience, I guess, that I worked with a builder who was tasked with building 42 homes for a gated seniors community. And they were all bungalows, and all of the bungalows had to have no step entrances, as well as a couple of other features. But the builder, this was the first time that they were challenged with this idea of building homes with no steps at the front door. All front car garages. So that's a bit of a plus in the sense that your front entrance then tends to be a little further away from the public street. So the no-step entrance is really a product of being able to have a gently sloping pathway to the front door. So if your front door is only 15 feet from the front, or you only have 15 feet of front yard, and your house is 2 feet off the ground, you're going to have some sort of ramp or a mechanical porch lift at the front. So working with this builder, he through his experience, he explained to me that there were other challenges that he faced other than just creating this sloping sidewalk situation or ramping situation at the front door. Part of that was just getting the house closer to the ground, the main floor closer to the ground, and then the need to waterproof the what we call the rim joist. So the rim joist is the vertical piece of wood that wraps around the house, the perimeter of the house, and keeps the floor joists in place. So we can protect that wood with waterproofing membrane, a rubber waterproofing membrane, the same type of product that you'd see on a flat roof, for example. What I like to do is build my foundations so that we can actually bury the floor joists inside the concrete. So build the concrete foundation wall a little higher, and rather than resting our floor joists on top of the concrete, we rest it inside. We hang the joists from the concrete.
So the way they do it now is to put them on top of the concrete. That's the typical building situation.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So again, builders will resist this new way or this other way of building because they're just not used to it. And the way that they often get their way is they'll say, well, it's way more expensive to do it that way. It truly isn't. It's just different. So They don't want to go there because then they have to train all the trades to make sure that they pay attention to this different type of detail.
You really need the buy-in.
You really need the buy-in from everybody.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Uh, but he did, he did say that was a bit of an issue and something I hadn't realized at the time. But it is true. We also now generally use high efficiency furnaces in our homes, and rather than having our chimney flue go through the floor system and up through the roof, and you often see that in older homes that your chimney flue is protruding out of your roof. The high efficiency furnace has the exhausting air out of the rim joist at the floor level. So if your ground is very close to that exhausting, then you have to create a window well around that exhaust valve at the rim joist. So that's a little bit more and different construction technique. So one could argue that costs more money.
It would also require the homeowner to pay attention in the snowy times of year to make sure it stays clear and doesn't get blocked.
That's right. Yeah. So
Right.
there's some issues around there. And then of course, if your house is a little bit further down in the ground, then your basement windows are a little bit further down, which forces you to have deeper window wells, which gives you less light in the basement. So we talked about that in a previous podcast where a lot of people want to get their basement as high out of the ground as possible to gain access to natural light. So what I've been doing a lot of times is actually oversizing the window wells, building them quite big, and that allows you to have bigger windows and bring lots of natural light into the basement space, which of course, compared to your typical way of building, a bigger window well is just more money than a smaller window well. It just stands to reason. So these are the sorts of things that builders will often argue, well, you're just increasing costs. But the norm is not to make buildings accessible. So anytime we make them accessible, then we're going outside of the norm. So one could argue it always costs a little bit more money. And then another very, very important feature in the no-step entrance is once you get to the door, you need to have your door threshold as having a minimal bump as possible. So something like a 1/4 of an inch bump. And that 1/4 of an inch would help prevent water from getting inside the house. And it's a very gentle bump. So most wheelchairs would easily get over that, or even a walker would get over that threshold.
Right.
So there's different techniques there that you can do. In my own house, we poured the concrete with a little divot in it, so that the door actually sat inside a little bit into the foundation. That's easy to do when you're pouring a new foundation. And then you just build the concrete up to it and the inside floor up to the threshold as well. So that works really well and still keeps the water out. If you go with a more commercial grade threshold, which is just a metal plate, then that eliminates the bump altogether. And the problem with that is potentially you could get water entering the house at that point. So the way around that is to have some kind of structure or canopy over the entranceway that prevents water from actually getting to the door and
Right.
to the door threshold itself. So yeah, there's lots of different ways to tackle it. In my own house, it was a bungalow. We added the second story, but we did have a front car garage. So I had about 40 feet from the public sidewalk to the door, and in that 40 feet, then I could just have a gently sloping driveway and sidewalk that gets to the door. So it's not really, I don't call it a ramp. I just call it a sloping pathway, and in that way, any potential negative aesthetics are eliminated because it just looks like a sidewalk. And we had the distance. So that's what I was saying. If my house was only 20 feet away or even closer to the sidewalk, the front public sidewalk, then it would have been really hard to create that sloping situation. My house was built in a conventional manner in 1967. And so it has the floor joists on top of the concrete foundation. So only at the entrance is concrete up against the floor joists and the rim joist. Everywhere else, the ground is 2 feet below the floor level. And so with my high efficiency furnace in the back of my house, there's no problem. I don't have to have window wells or anything like that. So there's different strategies you can use depending on the landscaping that exists on the lot that you're working with.
Right. They could build up the lot at the front of the house and have it slope off to the back and have traditional windows at the back. What is the slope that we're looking for? 2%?
It is it's 5% or less.
Okay.
So a ramp by code is 1 in 12. So for every foot you go up, you have to go 12 feet horizontally across. Okay. If you have 1 in 20, which is 5%, then it's no longer considered a ramp and it's just a gently sloping pathway. So in my case, I was able to do that. I was able to have a even less than 1 in 5 slope. Again, the way you could do it if you had less distance is to have your sidewalk meander somewhat in the front yard. So not just have a straight run at the front door, but actually go sort of side to side, right? So just make it a bit more of an adventure getting to the front door.
It's a design
and
detail.
and through clever landscaping and so on, it could actually be quite nice. I'm just finishing a house right now, not far from where I live, an infill house where we're doing exactly that with the house, and we're having a landscape plan with little benches that people can sit at and planters and so on. So this pathway will be really a joy to go up and down all the time. In the meantime, there's no ramps. It's just a nice sidewalk that gets you to the front door. And sure, it takes you 30 seconds longer to get to the door than if it was a straight sidewalk. But those 30 seconds are a big plus for your experience, right? So it's I think it's a real positive thing. So these are things we can do when we're doing custom homes. Your typical spec home builder probably wouldn't do something like that because they would pass the whatever costs on to the buying public. So again, it gets back to educating the builders and the buying public that some of these things may cost a little bit more money, but are really well worth it in the long run. And then you can find ways to save money in other areas of the house.
That's actually a good point that you raised. Let's talk a bit about price. Now, I know you can't talk about exact price without having an exact home in front of you, but roughly, what would the increase in price be to do an accessible entrance over the way builders typically do it now? And let's remind our listeners, we're recording this podcast at the end of June in 2023. So when we talk about pricing, it's what we know based on current day pricing.
Right. Yeah. And the great thing about that question and thinking about the numbers is the experience I had with that builder who built 42 houses. He said the first house they did, very inexperienced. He said all in, it was probably about $6,000 more for all of the things that he had to do. The extra window wells. So he factored in all of the things he did, which some of the things may not have been just because of the no-step entrance, but he sort of factored that all in. And he said that was about $6,000 extra.
For the first one?
For the first one. He said by the time they did, the third or fourth one, that number was reduced to maybe $1,000. So once they got used to doing it, it was easy. And in every one of those 42 houses, that cost varied depending on the grading of that particular lot. So some lots were just easier to do than others, just because of the nature of the way the land was sloping and so on. So you really should, I think you should keep in mind something in the order of $1,000 to $3,000, depending on the situation.
Okay.
And so I think sometimes you'll hear in visitability documents that it's only $100 more. one might argue that that's maybe California or Arizona numbers,
Right, where
where
they
they
don't
don't
have
build
winter.
they don't build with they don't yeah they don't have winter, they don't build with basements and that sort of thing. So it
Right.
really doesn't factor in. But the reality of building here is, yes, we there are some added costs, and but again, it's once you have the experience, once you've done it a number of times, then really the extra dollars don't really factor in at all.
Right. Okay. Now, in terms of language, you used a word, visitability. Let's explain what that is and look at maybe some of the other terminology that consumers would need to understand when they're talking to builders, and that builders would need to understand to have an effective conversation with their clients too.
Yeah. So when it comes to the no-step entrance, visitability is the key term that one would use. So visitability is very simply defined as a means of gaining access to a home with a no-step entrance. So that would be a hopefully the front or main entrance to the home, having no steps. So somebody in a wheelchair or a walker or somebody pushing a baby stroller could easily gain access into the house. The door of that entry would need to be wide enough for a walker, wheelchair, baby carriage to get through, which 3 feet is more than enough. So just your standard 3 foot door, which is commonplace. Three feet is what is typically done in every home in Canada. So,
And if you need more room, there are these cool little things called expandable door hinges that will give you 2 inches more
yeah,
that are relatively inexpensive and can be installed in a heartbeat. I can do that. I can do those. And you can do
yeah,
those in as many doors in your house as you need to. And that gives you 2 extra inches without even messing with the door opening itself.
that's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Perfect.
Um, and then the third issue. So the no step entrance, the door wide enough to get through, and then a bathroom on the level that you enter would be at least accessible. So it could be a powder room, a sink, and a toilet, but at least somebody could come to the house and visit you. So not live with you, but visit you.
Is
So
it? Yeah. Okay.
you can stay for a few hours, have more than one cup of coffee, and be able to use the bathroom, that kind of thing. So that's very important to keep in mind when we're talking about the no step entrance. You can do the entrance without steps at the side if your house is close to the front yard. I've done this in some mature neighborhoods here in Edmonton. So the front door, yes, has a sidewalk that leads to the front door. There's a kind of porch at the front and some steps that get you onto the porch and then into the door. But then the sidewalk has a sort of a secondary sidewalk that leads to the side of the house, and that takes a little longer, but you get to the side and you're at the grade level. So there's no, I'm sorry, they're at the main floor level. So there are no steps, and you can gain access that way. And then if you really needed to from the front, you could also have it wrap all the way around to the back door if you really were in a tight spot and you needed that extra room. So for that reason, I personally like corner lots for single family houses, because it offers you more options in terms of the way you can landscape and locate doors strategically to have that no step entrance.
Right. And for some people, neither of those things will be a solution, and they may have to enter through a garage. And we can talk about lifts in the podcast that we're going to do about vertical movement within the house. So anything that we talk about in that podcast, which is the next one we're doing, will apply to entering a home from a garage as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But this is just such a positive thing for people. It allows them to successfully carry on with their lives.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And, I'm as you were talking, I was thinking about a house that I did about 10 years ago for a couple that wanted to age in place. So they actually only moved 3 doors away from where they were living. But the gentleman had some health issues, and they lived in a house with, actually ended up inside, there were 6 levels, within the house. So there were stairs everywhere. And he was like, wow, I can't do this anymore. So they found this lot, and we built the house. Every house in the neighborhood had front car garages, and we actually built the garage floor so it was level with the main floor as well. So you could drive into the garage and just gain easy access into the house, or the exterior sidewalk led you to the front door, which was also had no steps at the entrance. And he would often talk about all the added benefits. And their previous house, the driveway sloped down towards the garage, and he said just pushing snow to the street was hard for him. But
Right.
now this other way that we did it, the driveway sloped up to the garage floor, so he just had to push the snow down. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but
It's a huge deal.
if you live in Edmonton, yeah, it's sometimes you get, anywhere in Canada, really, you get this snow that is sometimes hard to push, right? So, and anything that helps you is a good thing. So, those are really good strategies, and they were very, very aware that at 60 they wanted this house to be their forever home. They didn't want to have to move ever again. So they did it all. They did the no step entrance. They have an elevator in their house, and they have the wet room bathrooms as well.
Right.
As well as all the other features that we won't be really talking about as much.
Right. The story that always makes me want to tear up a little bit is when I think of your children and the experience they had with your house and with their grandparents, because your father was never able easily to get into your house. And I remember you telling me that at Halloween, he would just drive into the driveway, honk his horn, and the kids would come out and get the candy, and he'd drive away again. And that would be the end of that. But then you put in the no-step entry. And tell us about your children and their ability to engage with their grandparents after that.
Yeah, that is a great story, and I've talked about it enough that I don't actually well up anymore. But
I do.
yeah, I become a grandpa myself, so I completely understand now his passion and his love of his grandkids. I completely get that. And yeah, when we had the bungalow, it wasn't just Halloween either. It was literally every Saturday was his day to go out and do some shopping. And when the grandchildren were around, he would always get treats for them. So typically on a Saturday, he would drive up to our house. He'd park on the driveway. He'd phone, and one of the kids would answer often. I think they started to figure it. They were young, but they figured out that it's likely going to be him, and they're going to get some treats. so he would phone, and they would before I knew what was going on, they would run out the door. And again, before we built the second story to our house, my office space was in the basement. So I sort of hear this from below, and the door opening, and I'm like, oh, I better get upstairs because I don't know what my kids are doing, escaping. And they would run out, and he would have treats for them. And at the very best, they might, say hi and chat with him for a bit. But that visit was very short lived. And I would come out and say hi to him. And sometimes by the time I got up the stairs and out the door, he was already backing up and on his way. And so I didn't even get to see him. And I was extremely close to my father. So the day that we finished our house and the doorbell rang and he came in, he was able to just come in, was not only a great day for him and a great day for my kids, but for me as well. Right. So yeah, I ended up writing a little children's book about that whole experience, and hoping to relay to other children that, and hopefully they would ask their parents then after they read the book, that they'd go, yeah, how come we don't have a house like this where grandma and grandpa can come over and visit? Because grandma and grandpa generally tend to be pretty giving,
Right.
compared to the parents. So the grandkids generally like their grandparents a lot. So yeah, that really was that kind of emotional experience that you get from doing this sort of simple simple construction technique of just doing the no step entrance, right?
Right.
And Father's Day has just come and gone now, and this year I asked my kids to write in a card. So just get me a card and write in the card some memories they had of their experience growing up in a house that was a little bit different than the rest of the neighborhood. So yes, visually our house is a little bit different. It's more contemporary. It's got flat roofs. It looks a little bit different than most of the other houses, but on the positive side, it also is incredibly energy efficient, and it also is tackles with all of these accessibility issues as well. So I asked them just to get from them some ideas of what they thought, and I thought I'd just share a couple of sentences my son wrote in his card. He says, "I was in 5th grade when my dad decided to renovate our bungalow into the 2-story barrier-free home. He was able to convince my school to let us go on a field trip to the house during construction to see some of the features and construction processes. My class talked about the field trip for months. Me and my house were hot topics at school. I became a legend at Rideau Park." So that was the elementary school. So that was their grade 4 class. So it was very successful. And, we talked about all kinds of things with the house, but, big thing was this experience that he was able to share with his classmates about how Grandpa could come over and visit. And then during construction, he says, "I crossed the threshold of our new no-step entrance, and the rest is history. I saw a ramp, a skateboard, and those kids," and this is a long story, so I won't get into this part, "those kids with low ambition sitting in the hobo hut. We grabbed the scraps from construction and began building ramps and rails out of grab bars." And he talked about his short but successful skateboarding career with this sloping sidewalk. So, and then he closes by saying, 3520, which is our address, will always feel like home to many. And as Jake Chaco, a good friend of his, once said, "This is our house." So not only was it, in his mind, his house, our house, the Wickman house, but all his friends that came over felt really at home as well. So, it really does say a lot about adding these features that just make everybody feel welcome, right? So that's I think the true definition of inclusion. So what I take from that is that my kids understand that a house can be more than just a shelter. It can be a place that is very welcoming, not just to your own family, but to other members of other families. So, yeah, it's a great story, I think.
That is a perfect place to bring this particular podcast to a conclusion. So we will thank you for your insights into how to resolve the problem of getting into a house. I will invite our listeners to stay tuned for our next podcast, which will be all about vertical movement within a home. So until then, join us the next time, and thank you for listening in. Real Life Renos the Podcast is a production of Reno Studios, executive produced by Karen Brown. This is Real Life theme, music, and lyrics by Jane Carmichael, recorded at Swamp Songs Recording Studio in Lucan, Ontario, engineered by Matt Weston. Thank you for tuning in.